Good morning, Ayin Beis. We're at the new paragraph on the bottom of page 1353. So, what we've learned so far is about different levels of light and how they illuminate darkness, or they shine within dark, or they are translucent, but they're not glowing. This is all in the context of the beginning of the new section that began on page 1350, speaking about Torah, Hamshacham Amaylamata, Torah Oir. Torah is Oir. In contrast, mitzvah is called Ner, a candle. Neshama is also compared to Ner. So first he explained how Neshama and a mitzvah both are why they associated with a candle, because they have three components: wick, fuel, and the fire and light that they generate, as discussed on pages 1350, 1351, 1352 in detail. And essentially the wick is like a combination that is a mamutza, an interface between spirit and matter, essentially, between the fire and the material world, the animal soul, the human being, the physical existence. And it elevates it as it transforms yesh to ayin. So a perfect example is a candle, because you're taking the yesh of the oil, and as it's burning, slowly burning through the wick, which is the nefesh elikis and its contemplation on godliness, you turn yesh into ayin. So he said, Nidali Levayed, on page 1352, let's explain this. He's going to explain this with the Oir Hariyah. Sight and vision has also an element of light. We have not yet gotten back. That's what the next paragraph that we're going to learn now is going to discuss how this works exactly, how vision and sight works. And then I'll bring it back to Ner Mitzvah, to Ner, and obviously also to Torah, and we'll see how that develops. So in explaining what's Ayin, Oir Hariyah, he began by first comparing it to different types of light. That the Oir Hariyah is, according to, that there's an opinion that light emits from the eye, and that captures the image of an object. But to explain that, he says, it's not an Oir Atzmi. Vision and sight is not an Oir Atzmi. What's an Oir Atzmi? The sun, a candle, because they're both not just bright, but they also illuminate. They're luminaries. They're a source of light. And he explained at length what that means. In contrast to the next level would be stones, bright stones, which are bright and shine, but they don't give off light, meaning they're not illuminators. And we'll discuss in a moment what we learned yesterday about it a little more in detail. So they shine in the dark, as opposed to vision and sight. The eye does not glow in the dark. They do, but they're still not luminaries. So it's Oir Boyer, but it's not Oir Meir. That's the way he put it. Riyah is neither a Oir Boyer nor a Oir Meir, meaning it's not a bright state, it doesn't glow, and it also doesn't illuminate. But it is light, because with light, you're able to see. And we'll soon discuss that more in detail in the next paragraph. Then he went into the discussion of the two types of Oir, Techura and Nukva, Mashpia and Makabel, essentially the difference between the sun and the moon. With the example of a teacher and a student, of a husband and wife giving birth, of seeds, of the rain feeding, and the earth also making things grow. So in Eir Makabel, the Eir is there, but it needs a catalyst to stimulate it. Eir Mashpia has Eir that it illuminates on its own. Doesn't need an outside force to activate it. And we learned more in detail, the parentheses on page 1353, what that means, why both are called Moyer. Both the moon and the sun are both called a Moyer. They're both Atzmi. The difference is an Atzmi that's more of a state concealment, and the light is concealed in it as well, and that needs to be activated. And the Atzmi of the sun is like the Etzem Ha'er, that is an Atzmi, but it's a source of light. It relates to light. It's not concealment. It's connected to light. As we said, what it is Lamaila, it's the Koyach HaGilui and the Koyach HaHelam, and even higher, the Yechelis, the capacity to radiate, the capacity not to radiate. Okay. Now, after there's a stimulation and activation, then the moon also shines, even without the sun glowing into it, like the teacher and the student. And the more it's distant from the sun, the more it radiates. Now, then he brings us back to the lower level. What's the next lower level in light? That's not a luminary, which also shines in the dark. It shines, it glows. You could see the sun. As a matter of fact, like he brings from the Yerushalmi, and I did look it up. The Yerushalmi speaks about, there it talks about, it's at the beginning of Psachim. So it talks about Boitkin, the early Daled, the night of the 14th of Nisan. You're supposed to check for chametz, and you check for Eir Haneir. And he discusses there what happens if it's in a bright day. Do you also have to check is it only when it's at night? And in that context, he brings the idea of bright stones, that at night they glow more than by day. That's what he says there. And with the Rebbe Rashab quotes that Yerushalmi, Psachim Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph. He writes Tzarachian. Just want to point this out. He says Tzarachian. So what? If according to the opinion that it's a window, since the mazolis, the sun, the moon, the celestial bodies weren't functioning, what's the point of a window? The truth is, if you look in the Gemara there in the Yerushalmi, he says that's why there's a second opinion. The second opinion holds that it's precious stones and pearls that he had, which were like illuminated the teva, the ark, because that's exactly the reason for the second opinion. I guess, and the chalein, the purpose of the chalein was not to bring light into it, was later after the flood, it was through the window that Noach sent the bird, first the raven and then the dove, to see if there's dry land. So the window served a different function, not to bring in light. But apparently the Rebbe Rashab is bothered by the fact that there is an opinion that the window was there in order to bring in light. And then the question of the Leishim Shemazolis, just as an aside. But getting back now to these precious stones, to these glowing stones, where he says, Magolius, yeah. So here, there's something in between. On one hand, it's not a source of light, meaning it's not a luminary like the sun that was created to give off light. And yet, the stone does retain enough light that it becomes part of its personality, part of its feature. It has those properties. So it's not quite like a mirror, because a mirror is just a pure blind reflector. It reflects anything. Here, the stone is a glowing stone, and that's why Noach used it in the Teva. That's why Hashem said, use it, because it could give you some light. So he explains, how do you explain that in-between state? So he says, it's not it's not an illuminating force, because it's a stone like every stone. This rock is not different than any rock. However, it's only raised because that's its property. Just like there are rocks that are black, there are rocks that are gray, there are rocks that are white, there are rocks that have a glow to them. But he adds even more than that. And even the glow is not coming from the stone itself. It originates from the sun and from the stars, or the stars. I didn't look this up in detail. You have to see where that exists in science today as well. But regardless, he does say, so firstly, it's due to the property of the stone. It's not due to being a luminary. When you talk about the sun and the moon, the Torah says, I placed them in heaven in order for them to illuminate. Secondly, the Eir is coming from the sun or the stars. However, it's in a way that it assumes those properties. It's not just passing through like maiver, like we say, something passing through like a mirror. A mirror also reflects light, but a mirror never becomes something that glows on its own. And here it does. The stones, he says, they do glow because they assume that property, but they're still not an atzmi. Still not a moyer be'etzem, a sheyer atzmi kamei belevona. Or like the student and the teacher. There, the student, once he's received the intelligence from his teacher, now he can become a teacher and irradiate on his own. Whereas the stone is not that way. It's a daimon poshet, but it has that personality, and that which are required and assume the property from the sun, that's what's radiating. And that's why the darkness of the night does not conceal that glow. But it's still not like the shemesh, because yeah. So it shines because it becomes internalized, like I said, integrated, so it assumes that property. It's not radiating fundamentally. So it's something like, if you say that the sun would be the highest level of giving off light, the moon would be a next level because it doesn't have it on its own unless it's stimulated and it's activated. And the stone is even a lower level, the bright stone, because it's never really an atzmi. It's not a luminary. You don't call it a moir. And yet it has a glow which originates from the sun or the stars that gets internalized within it. That's what we're up to. And the next piece, he's now going to go back to Ayin Beis. But does anybody want to ask anything about what we've learned so far? Now I'll continue on here in the new paragraph. Just one moment. I just want to look something up. So the new paragraph close to the bottom of page 1353. You can find these pages at ayinbeis.com. And now we need to understand, how about now the sight, the vision in the eye, the sight of the eye? How does that fit in this context? Because all this was coming to explain at the beginning of the previous paragraph on page 1352, Riyas Ayin. So how does the eye work? Which way does the sight of the eye work? So for now, because now the light of sight that's connected to sight is not an er atzmi v'tivi. It's not a luminary, doesn't give off light. It's not a fundamental and natural luminary. Shari eina meir b'layla. Simple proof for that. It doesn't radiate at night. It doesn't see at night. It can't shine. It doesn't illuminate at night. So firstly, if it was a real luminary, it would shine by night. Like the sun, if you put it into the sky at night, it'll illuminate. The moon illuminates. Your vision doesn't have the power to illuminate. And even by day, when it does see, it's not because it has its own light. It's seeing things due to the light of the day. Kishemeh says, the only time, well, I don't know if it's the second thing. Firstly, good, and it doesn't see by day only when the sun is shining, or by night when the candle is shining. A candle is burning. So in other words, vision and sight, even though it's connected to light, but it needs another light to illuminate the environment, the area, and then you can see. So based on that, then the Eir Ariyah is also in the state of a makabel. Remember, we learned about a makabel. The moon is a makabel, but the moon has light fundamentally, and it just needs to be stimulated. But the precious stone is a makabel, And there it does not have light of its own. It's coming from the sun and the moon, but it receives it and internalizes it. So therefore he's saying, so it's also, so the vision, because it needs something else in order to be able to see, so it's also in the state of a makabel, that kashem makabel zulase, when this eye receives the light zulase from outside of it, meaning the light of the sun or the light of the flame of a candle, ozira, then it's capable of seeing things. Now, why do we call it light? We'll soon see why. Because at the end of the day, the ears don't see. The nose doesn't see, the fingers don't see. The eye does have the power to reflect images, depending what opinion, or to give off an itzutze like he said in the previous page, that some light comes out of it that is able to take like that's able to see objects, but it doesn't do that on its own. It needs to have a brightness around it, meaning it has to be either the sun is shining, meaning daylight, or by night there's some other luminary that is allowing the eye to see. So in this case, he calls it, therefore, it's like a makabel, because it needs another to be, it needs to receive light to be able to see. The imayes, and even though and even though the eye is a translucent piece of matter, as I said, it's not like a finger. It's not like a forehead. Well, let's not use forehead, it's not a good example. It's not like the ears. It is a substance that has the ability for light to come to shine through it. So like he says, that's called a chemes sfiri. Sfiri means from the word sapir, that it shines. Or I'd say translucent is the right word. Ubihiri, and illuminating. Because if the eye, God forbid, was completely blocked, no light would come in and no light would go out, so you wouldn't see things. As a matter of fact, the Gemara says, I don't know if he's going to bring it here, that it says Sagi Nohar is the name for the Chazal for a blind person. Now, Sagi Nohar means much light. Sagi is a lot, abundance of light. So Chassidus asks, what kind of statement is that? That's like loig l'rosh. It's like almost a like mocking. It's like a mockery. By instead of saying the person is blind, you're saying he's full of light. He sees so well. Well, how could you say that? So Chassidus explains that it's not mockery. It's actually an accurate description. The problem with a person who's blind, in many cases or all cases, is that there's too much light. He doesn't have the shields, the filters. Imagine the light burns. We see sometimes, God forbid, where a person's cornea is burned out, so there's too much light going in, so he also can't see. So it's not always due to the fact that there is that he's blind in the sense dark. Is because there was too much light. There weren't the proper filters, the iris and the cornea and all the other parts of the eye are not balanced properly. So the key to an eye is that it has enough transparency for light to come in, but not too much and not too little. And when that balance is proper, the eye is, like he says, sfiri ubihiri. It's a translucent and a bright entity. Chomer. The eir hariyah hu b'chinas eir. And when you say eir hariyah, the light of the vision, you connect vision with light, that's the level of eir. So you cannot say this is a state of, it's a dark piece of matter. It's not. In this sense, it has something similar to like a bright stone. Here it's more than a stone because it's alive and so on, and it sees things. But the eyes, therefore, have an element of oir in them. So this is all imayes. Even though the eye is translucent, b'kol mokim ein b'chinas er mashpia. So yes, it is a bright state. It is a bright piece of matter. The eye, bright, translucent. The different expressions I used. However, it's not an er mashpia. It doesn't give off light like the sun does. Ki'im b'chinas er makabel. It's an er makabel. It is an oir, but it depends on more oir, the oir around it, which is the sunlight or the candlelight or other forms of light to be able to see clearly. The ksher makabel Eir HaShemesh, Oy Eir HaNer, that when the eye receives the light, meaning it's benefiting from the light of the sun or the light of a candle, Az Hudaya, then the eye can see. The Tole Hariyah, and vision is dependent upon the Teikif Eir HaShemesh, the intensity of how much sunlight there is, Oy HaNer, or how much candlelight there is. The Kashayiyah Eir B'Yeser, when it's brighter outside, when the sun is shining brighter or the candle is shining brighter, Oz Yira L'Merachik Yeser. He can then see further. In other words, at dusk, or when the sun is dimmed, and it's like twilight or something, or where it's not yet, where the sun isn't bright, you don't see as far. If the sun is a bright, shiny day, you see further. V'gam yira gufim dakim yeser. You see further, and you also see things that are much more subtle. Like in the dusk, you don't see as far, but you also can't discern an object as clearly, because it's already, the light isn't shining outside. When the light is very bright, you can discern even subtle little things that you wouldn't see otherwise. That means gufim dakim yeser. More subtle bodies, basically. More subtle entities. So both in distance and the subtlety of something can be seen more when there's more light. So clearly, the Irariya is a makabel, because it's dependent on light in general, and depending on the strength of that light, that's how well we see, how far we see, and how well we see. Okay, so it's established now that in the context of what we've been discussing, Irariya is also makabel. He didn't compare it to the other makablim, like the moon or the glowing stone, but we can already surmise where he's going. But there's much more to be said. Any questions before I continue? Because he's now going to analyze this. He's going to analyze this further.
No, it's really not as very good. See, you mentioned Saginor, and it says too much light. I mean, there's a lot of blindness caused by not enough light getting to the retina, or the retina's burnt down. So, but why do they call it a Saginor? I guess it applies in all cases, but the explanation doesn't apply for all cases.
Well, when but too much light also creates blindness where you can't see anything. So it's not a contradiction. And I'm not analyzing every type of blindness. There are blindness that are connected to nerves, the optic nerve. It's not always the eye per se.
Exactly. That's the eye. That's the eye. I mean that's part of the. Okay. I just wanted to know why they only. I don't know what percentage, but I just was wondering why. I always wondered why. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I have a question, and he's probably going to get into this, so you can just say that. But the Indian of the Koach Hariyah and the eye, that's a makabel. I get that part clearly as a mashal, but in terms of whether it's a ma'ir, it's giving off light, like the moon, once it receives from the sun, it gives off light, and it's considered a ma'or. But the eye doesn't, at least in modern physical science, secular terms, doesn't give off light. I mean, other than the fact.
That's what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
That's clear. That's why it's not a. He didn't say it's like the moon.
Okay. Well,
he says it's a makabel. It's a makabel. Right. That's all he said.
Okay.
The stones are also glowing stones are also makabel. There's different levels of makabel.
Yeah, anyway, but whatever. I guess we all know these are mashalim. These are metaphors for Elikus. We're getting there. I guess I'm anticipating, what does the Koach Hariyah have to do with Elikus other than the basic things you learn at the beginning of Ayin Beis? Is sort of, I'm not clear where this is falling into the implications on Elikus, but maybe it's a premature question.
It is. Obviously it is, because he's continuing the discussion. He didn't stop and didn't end it. He began by first explaining Ner Mitzvah, Ner Neshama, and then he said, let's explain it with understanding Eir Hariyah. Just for the record, Riyah plays a tremendous role in Torah. When you say when Mashiach comes, v'nigla kved Hashem, havaya v'ro kol basar yachdav, that the godly light will shine and be revealed, and all will see. By Matan Torah, v'yar, royim esakel. The concept of vision is a critical one in Torah because it all expresses a deep experience of godliness that's more than just hearing, it's seeing. Seeing is always associated with light because light is revelation. So just keep that in mind in general, but we'll get there. Right now, he's trying to quantify and place Eir, what type of light is it? So first he gave a long this whole paragraph introduction of different types of light as an Eir Atzmi. Then he broke it into Eir Makabel, Eir Mashpia, and Eir Makabel. And now he said that based on what we just described, the way vision works, that it needs the light around it to see, that we've established that it's Eir Makabel. But he's now going to challenge that. He's going to question, is that really the case? That's the next section now.
Okay,
so he says like this now.
Thank you.
Okay, so he says like this. Seemingly, there may be an argument to be made. There's room to say that Riyah is not even in the level of a makabel. Because makabel indicates, like we talked about, a student receiving from a teacher, or the moon receiving from the sun. You could argue it's not even a level of makabel. Sight is possible because the sun is illuminating an object. Sun, he means here basically daylight. There's light that's illuminating the object. The object that is now visible. In other words, it's almost like a passive experience. Since the sun is shining and illuminates everything, so now we have a faculty called vision, so we're able to see. But it's not that the Oyer Hariyah is a makabel from the Shemesh. The Oyer Hariyah is benefiting from the light that's shining. Top of page 1354. So what we said till now, that it's a recipient of a light, you don't have to say that. There's room to say, an argument to be made, that it's not mekabel by zehu that he receives. In other words, the vision, the eye is receiving the light of the sun, and that allows it to see. The light of the sun is shining, it radiates a dark environment and area. So now there's light shining, so you can see things. But not that the eye does not need to be receiving light from the sun. It's the sun that's shining, and the light is just benefiting, and the eye is just benefiting from it. Obviously, this is not, he's just saying that seemingly there's yesh mokem lemer, l'cheri yesh mokem lemer. But he's going to continue to analyze it. So here's what he says. But in truth, we see the ikra riyah, even though till now we've been saying it's dependent on how much light there is, you can see further and more subtle objects due to the strength of the light. He says, in truth, we see the ikra riyah, the primary power of vision, totally betev klei ayin, the tuv klei ayin, is dependent how refined, how good is your power of vision, is your sight, b'tzad atzmei, on its own. He's introducing the concept of 20/20 vision, or whatever that level is, by different people. The kasher chemer ayin chazak b'teikef keyachar yeser yuchel liris l'merachik ebegufim dakim. That when the very eye, the very body of the eye is healthier, is stronger, with the intensity of being able to see better. In other words, it's a far healthier eye. You can see further, or subtle bodies. Before we said it's dependent on the brightness of the light, which is also true. He's not contradicting. But he's saying, but in truth, if you really think about it, it's dependent primarily on the strength of the eye, because you could have the brightest day, but if the eye is very weak, if a person has very, very nearsighted or very farsighted, or the different levels, and doesn't have clear vision, a very weak eye, the brightness outside is not going to change much. It helps, and it's necessary, because no matter how good your eyes are, you can't see in pitch black. That's true. We're not denying that, and he's going to discuss that. But on the other hand, it's not the light alone, but it depends on how good the eye is. And we see that people have 20/20 vision, can see very clearly. They see objects. You know, you ever take an eye test, you see that right away. What are they showing you? It's a perfect example of gufim dakim. The smaller the letters, if your eyesight isn't so good, you can't see, they're very blurred. When the eyesight is better, you see even the very, very tiny letters that they show you. That's a guf dak. If the eye is not so great, you can see the larger gufim, the gufim that are gasim, larger or thicker letters. Perfect example. So you see that it's dependent, like he says, ikir hariyatoli b'tiv kleya ayin, on its own. It's not finished yet. So dependent on that will be how far we see and how subtle, and how subtle we see. And this is true, that a good eye will see better even when the light isn't shining that much. In other words, to put it simply put, someone with a very weak vision in a bright day is not going to see as well as someone with excellent vision in a day that's not so bright. He doesn't say that example. I'm using it just to make the point. He's just saying, what does this mean? V'hainu, and this means when the very physical eye is betuv b'yeser, is very healthy, very an excellent shape. And the light and the power of vision shines through it in an increased way. He's able then to receive the light of the day or the sun better. Since he's such a good recipient, so even a little daylight or sunlight is enough for him, lires harbe, to see much. It's interesting, he's using the word makabel. We'll soon see where he's going with this. But basically, he's adding another element here, that we're not just talking about the light outside. Obviously, he's making the case that it's a makabel. Before he said that seemingly you could argue that the eye is completely passive. But now he made a very strong case. No, the eye is critical. If the eye is not in good shape, it's not going to see well. And if it is in good shape, it'll be able to receive even a little light, even if it's somewhat a dim day or a cloudy day or at dusk or whatever it may be, where the sun is not shining so brightly or the daylight's not so brightly. He's able to, a good eye, a powerful eye that's able to see well, will be able to discern and see better, see well. Yeah. So now, essentially, he's established that it is an Eira Makabel. In other words, because the eye itself needs to have properties that allow you to see well. It's not just, as I said before, like a passive thing, that since the sun is shining, the eyes are neutral, and doesn't matter whether you have strong eyes or weak eyes, everyone sees equally. That's not the case. It depends how much Eira Makabel there is, meaning how well how well your eyesight is to absorb and benefit from the light around it. So it's not perhaps quite like the sun, like the moon, that absorbs sunlight, depending how you interpret it, or the precious stone that absorbs sun. It's not about absorbing, but it's still a makabel, and therefore plays a role what this makabel is like and how well it receives in order to determine how much it sees. Now the Rebbe Rashab is going to take it even further. Because now, basically, you can say that you need both. You need the sunlight or the daylight, and you need a good eye, a healthy eye, to see well. So he says, Gam b'zeh shleimer, in this itself that we just established, that the eye, that you need a healthy eye, and the sun is necessary because it does illuminate. says Gam b'zeh shlema de'er hashemesh, that the light of the sun is only, its role is to place this hurak lahasid es hacheshech. It's only to remove the darkness. So till now we were saying the sun actually illuminates the object. And the eye, a good eye, is able to benefit from that because it has the capacity to receive, and a better eye is able to see better. He's saying, you could also say, in this itself, you can say that the primary role, he doesn't say primary, he says the Eira Shemesh is only there to remove the concealment, the darkness. And that allows, it's like, it would be like saying like this, just as an example. Imagine you have an object in a room. You can't see it because it's covered up. Someone covered it with something. It's inside of a box. It's inside of a chest. So even though you may have great eyesight, you don't have X-ray vision, so you can't see through the box. However, if someone removes the cover, then you can see. So he's saying that perhaps you can also say that the sunlight is not so much about the oir, it's removing the cover that conceals things. So now the vision of the person can be in full glory, can see everything that it needs to see. In other words, giving even more strength to the oir ariyah than we've learned till now. Because you could also say, no, it's not just removing the cover. The light of the sun actually creates an illuminating environment, and that's where the eye can benefit from and see well. But he's going now and saying, you could say like this, we'll soon see the difference, and I'm sure it's all going to play itself out in Ruchnius, like you said, and Avodah and so on. But let's continue. It's lahatzis hacheshev, v'oz the eir ariyah. And when the vision of the person is stronger, he has a stronger vision. He sees even with a little light, because the light has removed the darkness, so his vision is able to take over and able to see things. But based on this, you could argue, in one of the opinions, the first opinion he brought, Yesh Day on page 1352, he brought an opinion that the way the eye sees is the eye actually gives off light, like a luminary. Now, it's not like a flashlight. You look at someone's eyes, you're not going to see light coming out of their eyes because it's invisible. But still, there's something coming from the eye that's able to capture the image of something that it sees. Now, actually, if you look in science today, they talk about how we see things. It is about light bouncing off objects, and the eye is able to gather. Remember, it's called light waves. So when you have light outside, it's bright outside, light is bouncing off, let's say, whatever object you're looking at. The eye has a capacity to receive those light waves and in turn internalize it, and that's why we see objects. But based on that, there is an opinion that the light, the eye actually emits something that's able to receive those light waves. So based on that, you could say now, first he went the other way around. Who says maybe Riyah is altogether not a makabel even? Because maybe it's just the sunlight, daylight. He said, no, you have to say it's the eye as well, because the eye, your eyesight and your strength of eyesight, it depends how much you see. If you don't have good eyesight, doesn't matter how bright it is outside. Now he went further and said that the sun or the day is only a removal of the cover, of like the darkness. So it seems to be completely dependent on the eye now. But now he's going to go back and say, no, it's not this way, not one extreme or the other. Because now you could say maybe it's Eira Mashpiyah. Maybe the eye does give off light, not like the sun. We understand it's not revealed light waves, like the sun shines sunlight or daylight or candlelight. But maybe the eye has more power than we know in that sense. So he says, no, that's not the case. That's where he goes back now. And the truth, you have to say that the Eira Riyah, the vision of this, the light of the eye, it's an Er Makabel. It's not just that the sun is just is just a removal of the dark. I think that's what he wants to say. But regardless, you can't, that's an Eira Makabel. Why? Because at the end of the day, no matter how good your eyesight is, it is not like flashlights or like a light that in the dark you can see. A person with 20/20 vision, perfect vision, does not see better in the dark than someone that doesn't have. Maybe a little better if there's a little light out there, but in pitch black, it won't make a difference. And if the eye indeed was an er mashpia, an er that gives off light, it would see and illuminate in the darkness just like the light of the sun does. The sun can't be stopped by darkness. The only reason it's dark is because the sun is not there. But if the sun is shining, it's a bright light that will illuminate. So therefore, coming back to a more balanced picture here, in order to see, for the eye to see, it needs help from an air outside of it. So that makes it an air makabel because it can't do it on its own. So as much as the healthy eye is necessary to see well, but he's established that it's air makabel. And he went back and forth, first saying, 1 second, maybe it's not even a makabel. Then he's saying, not only is it a makabel, it actually has real power. And I was coming back and saying, no, yes, the eye, it's critical that the eye have light and the power to see well, but it needs help, support, light from outside itself in order to see. And nevertheless, to go back to the other side of the coin, it's not just that the eye is passive. It's not that the sun is making us see things. It's the eye that's able to see. When you see things, the eye itself is seeing it. You are seeing something. So the eye is playing a role that's connected to light, to revealing something. But in order for it to see, it needs the sun or the daylight to shine and the help for you to be able to see. But when you do see, you're not seeing with something outside of yourself. Like, let's say, God forbid, a person who's blind and they have a seeing eye dog, or they have something that is, let's say, some new technology that's allowing them to see objects, like a camera. I mean, they've already developed cameras that even blind people can see their surrounding, but it's not their eye is seeing. It's a camera that's seeing, and the camera is feeding into their brain in some way. Here we're saying the eye itself sees. It's b'riyah atzmei. The ein zeh k'mo eir halavana. And this is not like the light of the moon. She'er shelo boeh de'er hashemesh. That the light of the moon comes from the light of the sun. Hameir ba. Well, this is gonna complicate things, because didn't we learn before that the moon does have light of its own? So he's going to qualify that in the parentheses. But he's now going to explain how the Eir Hariyah is even stronger in a certain way than the moon. Because the moon, it comes through the sun, Hameir ba, that radiates within the moon, Ubila de zeis ein ba er ma'atzma. And without that, the moon has no light of its own. However, didn't we say before that's the first interpretation, less lamagam al klum, that has no light of its own? All it is a reflection of the sun. That would be correct. And there, the vision of the eye is definitely superior to that, because the eye does have something of its own, the power of sight. The moon is just a blind mirror based on that. But didn't we learn there's the second level that he said that the moon does have a light of its own? However, it needs the sun to stimulate it. So this is what he adds in the parentheses. That even according to what we said earlier, that the moon does have less klum, does not mean it has no light at all. It means it doesn't have an illuminating light, but it has power of light within it. That which shines in the moon is its own light. That's explicitly only once the Eir HaShemesh stimulates and activates it. Mashenkin Eir Hariyah hu b'chinas Eir be'etzem. Eir Hariyah is Eir be'etzem. In other words, the eye itself is a translucent, an entity that have light. Okay. And as the light of the eye, of the vision itself, with that is what he sees. So even though the moon has its own light, but for it to be illuminating, it needs the sun. Here, he's saying that eye has already an illuminating element, even though it needs the sun in order to be able to see. So it's a little more internalized. We still need to explain what the distinction is, because seemingly both of them need the sun. Without the sunlight, the eye can't see. We established that. That's why it's a makabel. So what's the difference between the Eir makabel of vision and the Eir makabel of the moon? But he's making a distinction now, because clearly the moon cannot illuminate without the sun, and the eye has an element of some type of Eir, the etzem, even without the outside, but it cannot actualize it until you see. So what's the difference in Avana? I have not explained it. I need to think about it. I need to see what he's going to say. But he's clearly making now a distinction in Makabel itself between the moon and vision. So then if that's the case, why can't the eye see on its own without light? Because it's not an Eir Atzmi. Since it's not an Eir Mashpia, to radiate and illuminate the darkness, that's why it needs another form of light, a light outside of it, besides it, to illuminate the darkness so the eye should be able to see, both to remove the darkness and to help it and support it be able to see. So I think the key thing to keep in mind, he's going to speak and explain it more, but I'm going to stop here. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is the analysis of the eye itself. In other words, I'm thinking for a moment, the moon, it doesn't say anywhere that the moon has to be a healthy moon to reflect the sun. The moon is the moon. It's an Eir Makabel. It has its own energy, its own light. Yes, correct, it does. So when the sun stimulates and activates it, it shines with its own light. Like the student has seichel of his own, and when the teacher stimulates it, the seichel then shines on its own as well. Maybe student is not a good example here because the student would be the difference. But you don't say the concept that the moon itself, the chaymer, like the moon itself, if it was in a better shape, it'd be better, shine better. With the eye, he made it clear that the eye itself, there's 20/20 vision, and there's less vision. In other words, the health of the eye. He says, the toli betuv klei ayin. You don't say that on the moon. That the power of your vision is dependent on how good your eyesight is. The reason you need light is because the eye is still an Eir Makabel. So you need light to remove the darkness and also to help the eye be able to see, so the light should reflect and we'll be able to see things. That's why we need the sunlight. But the very eye itself is critical in the process because a healthy eye does not need so much light. Whereas the moon, you don't talk about the clay of the moon. The moon is what it is. And it's completely up to the sun's power that activates or doesn't activate the moon. That's how I think I would explain the difference. So the eye was created differently because the eye was created with a certain translucent nature and that element that it has light. But the light of a makabel, not of a mashpia. In that sense, it's like the moon, but it's different because it has something of its own that the moon doesn't have quite as much. So though the moon has an element of light in it, but it's not quite the way it is in the eye. I would also add, by the moon, he said it's koyach hahelam. Remember, the moon reflects ultimately the helam above. But the eye, you don't say it's the koyach hahelam. The eye is, you don't say it doesn't have anything of its own. You say the eye needs light to help it. That's why it's a makabel. But you don't say that it's on its own complete state of concealment as you do on the moon. These are the few distinctions I would make. But remember, we're middle of the subject, so it's not finished yet. And it looks like the Rebbe Rashab is going to continue to develop this. And obviously then come back and understand what we need to understand in the transforming of the darkness of this world through Ner Mitzvah and Torah and so on. Yeah. So this may be the interface between Ner and Oir. Maybe not. I don't know yet. We'll see how it goes. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Even though there's more to go, more to explain, we'll do that on Sunday. Let's stop here. Any questions? We're in the middle of page 1354. Yeah, I see in the next section he's going to explain further why he's making this case that vision has what he called Oir be'etzem. That it's Oir be'etzem. It's not Oir atzmi or mashpia, but it's Oir be'etzem. He's going to explain this further, which I think will help us understand the distinction between the vision of the eye and the moon. And hopefully it'll also explain the difference between the glowing stones, which I think are definitely a lower level there. Yeah, I see. At the end of the paragraph on page 1355, he's going to conclude there are three types of Oir: the sun, the moon, the bright stone, glowing stone, and Oir Hariyah, the power of vision. Okay. All in Makabel, 3 levels. He says it clearly. So I'm sure he's going to explain it more. Let me stop. Anybody want to ask anything?
I know I'm jumping the gun here, but we've been going for 2-3 pages on a mushal. Obviously, he's setting this up for some very profound ruchnius. It's obvious, but I wonder if you can opine, or not opine, but give over this Inyan of Koach Hariyah, and we, if it's connected with the Inyan of Zichuch, Zichuch Kalim, and that is to say, the more refined your eyesight is, the better your eyesight, the more you're able to see, and so you're able to, and that goes to this issue of, you talked about seeing godliness. I think, I forget the phrase you used, the yar, and I don't remember the pasuk you said, but the Koach Hariyah plays into this because it's not just what's happening objectively, existentially outside of ourselves, but the extent to which we're able to see it. We have to refine ourselves in order to bring out the light, to see and to have the light illuminate the darkness. It also depends on our own capacity to be able to see that. Meaning, it could be happening, but if we're not refined enough, if our eyesight is not refined enough, then we're not going to see it. So it takes not just godliness coming into this world, but we are, as humans, we are critical to that process and our ability to see it. Can you go that far? Or you're like, no, Yitzchak, you're way too far ahead of this.
You're absolutely, that's the case. Not only that, I wouldn't be who I am if I would do what you're doing right now, which is, it goes against the grain of everything I've been trained to do, which is the Rebbe Rashab is going to spell it out. So it's called patience. When the Rebbe would give a farbrengen that went for hours, I could not afford, he didn't have the luxury while he's speaking to say, okay, where's this going? I would let the Rebbe, that's the role of a Rebbe. That's what a Oir HaMakabel is. You're allowing the mashpia to lead you, not you lead the mashpia. So I understand the temptation and desire to try to apply this and try to understand where this is going, but it goes against everything my whole personality, which is I will not understand the nimshal, the moral, if you don't understand the mashal. So it's also, and this is not a critique, I'm just telling you, it's a training and a discipline that is critical for me, at least, which is that if I don't understand what he's saying here, I'm not going to understand what he's going to say 5 pages from now. And I don't even want to go peek. I don't even have that desire to do so. So you could do that if you like. You can go look ahead and see where it's going. He's going to, I'm sure, discuss it. So for me right now, the most important thing is to be exactly what we're learning, is to be an Oir HaMakabel. Right now, I'm nothing of my own. I'm listening to what the Rebbe Rashab is saying, trying to understand well, line by line. And like it says in the Talmud, when you're busy absorbing, you're not busy exuding. When you're busy exuding, you're not busy absorbing. So it's perfectly normal and healthy for people to want to understand what you want. But I absolutely won't opine on this matter right now.
Okay, fair enough. Fair.
Quite deliberately. No,
Yeah.
quite deliberately. It's not it's not because I don't want to respond to your questions. It goes against, I won't understand it well if I start going there.
No, I think it's a good lesson in Chassidus, anyways, that we all have to have the discipline to understand it step by step, because ultimately we're going to get what we want, the lesson, the moral, the nimshal. But we have to be patient to understand each element of the analysis so that we can understand.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I hear you. It's a good lesson. And I appreciate it.
You're an attorney. When you
Yeah.
build a case in a courtroom, would you like the jury or the judge to say, let's know where you're going. I don't want you to continue talking so much. Tell us where you're going. Tell us your conclusion before you, and he'll say, no, I have to build my case piece by piece.
Yeah, but
Because
I will
later,
say, yeah, I
because
will say
later-
this. Yeah.
One second, because later, if I don't build it piece by piece, you're going to take it apart, and I need to build the logic. It's like geometrical calculations. You need to know all the steps before you get to the conclusion. Anyway, bottom line is what I wanted to say is, it's a not only a discipline, it's the way you're supposed to learn. That's how it works, and that's how it is. I will tell you even furthermore. When we come later, we'll have to go back, and I think then understand what he's saying here better. Right now, there's a lot of things here that will become clarified when we go later. That's life.
Yeah.
There's no way around that. I see that, see it all the time as we learn through volume 3. Look how many things that we understand
Yeah.
that was said much earlier, only later when he started really coming back and tying it together. Anyway, it's fine. We'll get there. No, don't be concerned.
Yeah, but obviously the Rebbe Rashad knows exactly what he wants to say in terms of Ruchnius well before he's using these examples, these metaphors. And so one wants to try to understand the correlation, because some of this is based on physical science, like Tzvi is asking, in terms of blindness and the idea of the eye actually sending some kind of rays of light out to go touch the the subject it's looking at. We know that's not the case. So it's difficult to fight through the science the Rebbe Rashab is trying to give over.
We're talking about now something else completely. First,
Yeah.
I just want to confuse, since there are people who are at the class and people who are going to listen later, you're now changing the subject, my understanding. We talked firstly about where this is headed. Now you're talking about the science of this. So if you don't mind, I'm going to stop the recording now where we stopped here, and we can talk about that, but it's a separate discussion.
I understand.
From my
Fine.
point.
Sorry.
So we'll stop here right in the middle of where he starts bringing a proof. He's going to say v'araya lezeh. Like a third of the way down on page 1354, the proof that Orei Riyah is different than the moon, as he's explaining. So we'll stop